Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I thought I would talk about some of the popular books that I hated. Honestly, I was kind of anxious about filming this video because I didn't want to accidentally offend anyone. I realized I don't need to apologize for having an opinion that's my own, even if it is different to a lot of other people's. I'm not going to pretend that I liked certain books when I didn't. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't find fault with others when I did. So this video is kind of just going to be a rant about some of the popular books that I really disliked. First book on my list is Looking for Alaska by John Green, which I've mentioned before. This was the second book by him that I read after The Fault in Our Stars, and I loved The Fault in Our Stars, but this one just didn't do anything for me. I found the characters to be incredibly unlikable. I wasn't attached to any of them. They felt like regular characters that had been given some kind of outstanding quirk or character trait to try and make them more remarkable, but they were still quite boring characters, and I didn't like any of them, really. They were annoying. I didn't like Alaska, especially because she was kind of selfish and treated her friends in this really moody, hot and cold way that I just didn't like, and for that reason I just found it really hard to get into this story and enjoy it kind of at all. So this book kind of turned me off John Green's writing for a while. I want to read his other books at some point, but if this is any indication of what to expect, I'm not really that keen. Next up we have Winger by Andrew Smith, which I know so many people love, but this book just wasn't for me. I found the main character to be really frustrating because he is younger than the other characters in the book and feels like he's always kind of trying to make up for that by being a bit of a dick. One of the main things that annoyed me was the descriptions of women in this. It kind of felt like the author was trying to write like a 14-year-old boy, so all the descriptions of female characters were based around whether they were hot or not hot, and I just don't think that's a valid way to describe every female character in your book. Without going into spoilers as well, the ending of this book really frustrated me because it felt out of place with the rest of the story. It felt like it was only done to kind of set it up for a sequel or kind of pack some kind of emotional punch, but because I wasn't attached to the main character in any way, it didn't affect me, and I just really didn't like this book, so I'm not going to read the sequel. Next up we have All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, which I don't have heaps to say about. I was really excited to read this book because it's about mental illness, but that's actually where my main problem stems from. I was hoping to read a book about mental illness that was honest about depression and suicide and teenagers living and struggling with it, and instead this book kind of used mental illness as a way to advance the romantic plot in this book, and I just don't think that was an okay thing to do. I didn't like it because it made it seem like the story was just trying to make me sad the whole time, if that makes sense, and I wasn't made sad by it. I wasn't attached to the characters really, so I didn't feel the sadness of this book. This next book is another one that I was super excited to read but ended up being disappointed by, and it's Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. My two main problems with this book stem from the fact that it was marketed both to me and to everyone as Game of Thrones for the young adult audience. Problem number one is that it was too similar to Game of Thrones. There were some characters or plot points that were literally Game of Thrones, and I understand being inspired by another author or using their work to kind of guide your own, but this was just too similar for my liking, and once I noticed it, I couldn't not notice it, and it really impacted my enjoyment of this book. The second problem I have is that there is no such thing as Game of Thrones for the young adult audience, and I should have realized that before I read this book, but I didn't, and now it's kind of bothering me because the great thing about Game of Thrones as a series is how honestly it portrays war and feuding kingdoms and all those sorts of things. And the key theme is that all the atrocities in history aren't committed by the monsters or the magicians or anything, they're committed by people. And a young adult version of that can't portray war or feuding kingdoms with the same honesty. And there were some moments in this book where I felt like the author was kind of holding back for the sake of younger readers, when those scenes should have been really powerful, but they just kind of couldn't be. And I don't know if this sounds stupid, but it's just what I feel about this book. I don't want people to think that the only reason I disliked this book was because it was compared to Game of Thrones and I was disappointed. Because if I'm being honest, the character development and world building were both really lacking, or at least I think they were. We have these three kingdoms, and I could not tell the difference between them. I knew that one of them was poor, and two of them worshipped different gods, but they ate similar foods, they dressed the same, their language was the same, all their slang terms were similar. You couldn't tell the difference between them, and I think the fact that that world building was kind of lacking really brought the whole book down to a lower level, and I just didn't enjoy it because it's fantasy and there needs to be a lot of world building for it to be a good book. Final book I'm going to talk about is Dumpling by Julie Murphy, and again, my main problem with this book is the way that it was marketed. I got this book in an owl crate and it was heralded as being all about body positivity, and we have a fat main character who's okay with who she is, and I was really looking forward to reading it. But instead, I got this character who, instead of being positive about her own body, is just incredibly negative about everyone around her, and she's incredibly judgmental and just rude, and I didn't like her. And I understand characters who are kind of bitchy because that's what people do, but Willow, the main character in this book, just didn't really have any redeeming qualities. I just found her to be annoying. And it wasn't until about the final third of this book that the body positive stuff kind of came in, and I did really enjoy the final third, but it just wasn't enough to make up for how much I disliked the main character. These are just a few of the popular books that I didn't like, and there's a chance that later in the year I'll do another video talking about more of them. I tried not to go into any spoilery detail in this video, but if you are curious about what I thought of these books in a little more detail, just ask me in the comments and I'll be more than happy to tell you the full story about my hatred of them. But that's it for this video, guys. I upload videos Wednesdays and Saturdays, so be sure to like and subscribe and tune in on those days for more bookish goodness. Toodaloo!